does racism exist in your country?
Our country was built on racism, so
Yeah.
I don't know much about the foundation of the UK and Germany, but our country was literally built on it. They brought people over here to build the country, and then they killed the people who were here, all because they were different.
I would like in Germany.
Yes, and racism definitely is a huge issue here in Germany. When we talk about these alt-right parties who are extremely xenophobic and racist, where I can quote people saying like, yeah, African people with their barbarian culture are going to run over Europe and stuff. That is pretty racist. I mean, here in Germany, in this entire year, I think we had like 3 hate crimes, yes. Where in one there were like 9 people murdered by some far right dude, and they were all from Turkey. And I think that it came to that point where people are killed simply for where they're coming from. This just shows how much of an issue it is still here in our German society.
It's much more like insipid here than it is in the States, from what I can tell. Like, it's so on the surface in the States that it's impossible to miss. I mean, there is still very violent racist acts that happen here, but they're not as common. You know, systemic racism in the police, it's throughout all of society for sure.
Lynching was just passed as a hate crime in 2019 in the United States. So it was legal here for a very, very, very long time, and there was absolutely no repercussions for lynching. So I think that the fact that that was a legal act, and that we are in 2020 and it was just passed in 2019 that now considers it to be a hate crime, I think that that speaks very loudly that racism is a humongous problem here in the States.
I certainly witnessed it firsthand going to the States and how different it is from here. I think over here, a lot of friendship groups, bars, clubs, pubs, it's very much more inclusive than it is in the States. I think here you see it more politically in schools, in, police systems, stop and searches. I can't even remember the last time I saw a white person at the side of the road getting pulled over by the police.
I just wanted to ask the people in other places, I feel like in America, there's always an excuse as to why you're not racist. Like my stepdad, for example, has like a World War II propaganda poster in his office, but not like join Captain America and punch Hitler, like come join the Nazi Party propaganda poster. And when you call him out on his racism, he's like, I'm not racist. I listen to the Wu-Tang Clan. Those kinds of things don't make you not racist. And in America, a lot lately, we've seen, especially coming from a lot of white women, is someone will call out a white woman for being racist. And she's like, no, but my husband's Black, or I adopted a Black child. Like, I can't be racist. Do you guys experience that in your countries?
Yeah, absolutely. I experienced that a lot when people like say, no, I'm not racist because I have Black friends. And I really don't think it's about being racist or not. It's about reproducing racism and racist narratives. Call out racism here in Germany. It's really, really hard at some time because German people here, many of them try to some sort of deny history. We as Germans are collectively ashamed of our history. Many people in general, especially more right parties, they don't really want to talk about that. If you call a person out for saying something racist, you feel like being called out as a Nazi. And I think this is making the discussion how we can address racist narratives, racist slurs, very hard when people immediately think, oh my God, I'm a bad person, I am a Nazi. It's not about that. It's about we all just want a society where everybody is equal. Therefore, we also have to call out when people are reproducing racism. Then you're not a Nazi, but people here tend to, at least in my perspective, I see that a lot.
I think that the term, when people consider or ask themselves if they're being racist or ask themselves if something is racist, I think that a big part of it is understanding that racism, it's not only that utterly nasty characteristic of the person hating Black people or a specific group, it's also understanding, and it's not just the intense segregation that we used to experience, that we still experience today. I mean, in the States, it's still an issue. It's just called different things now. It's also understanding that it's your behavior and the way that you react to little situations. You know, when you talk to people, ask them, do you cross the street when you see a Black man on the other sidewalk? Do you go the other way? You know, do you clutch your purse tighter when you see a Black group of friends hanging out when you're walking down the street? You know, like, what are your reactions to certain situations? Those are racist reactions. So understanding that it's not just those tendencies that are so ingrained in us as human beings because of being raised in this society that is so inherently racist from its core, those are the racist actions. So you yourself may not be a racist as a whole in human being, but you have racist tendencies that you have got to face. And I think that that's something that people are kind of waking up to or not understanding entirely, and which is why so many people defend so hard. I am not a racist because I do X, Y, and Z. It's what are you doing on a daily basis that does actually promote racism and doesn't fight against racism?
I have a quick question. How can you unlearn it as a white person? Like, what are some ways to do it?
Well, I think a lot of like educating stuff, and I've really been enjoying the Layla Saad route, where you literally have tasks per chapter, like in what ways do you have white privilege, fragility, and you have to relive experiences that you may not have even like noticed where you've done something wrong, and then learning why it was wrong and to stop you from doing it again in the future.
I think people have a hard time differentiating. So like I know I've definitely been guilty of sometimes unconscious bias, and I've worked to undo those. But if somebody were to say like you shouldn't cross the street just because there's like a Black man walk towards you on the sidewalk, like I'm across the street if a man is walking towards me on the sidewalk. I don't care if he's white or Black or Hispanic. I'm a girl and I'm crossing the street. And if somebody thinks of that as racist, then like that's not on me. And so I think that sometimes people have a hard time being told like crossing the street when there's a Black man walking towards you is racist, because I know in my heart, like I did it because he's a man and not because he was a Black man. And so that puts them in a corner of being defensive. So it closes them off to examining the other things that were potentially things that they have done that maybe were purely racially biased, as opposed to having other reasons for their actions.
I think it is very important when we try to address this issue. If you're extremely racist, you are a bad person, but just like the slightest amount of microaggression, where you are crossing the street when there's a Black man walking on your side of the street, this is something that also goes deep down in our education, in our way, in our ideology. We have to dismantle it, especially here in Europe. I really have the feeling that people do not connect it. They do not really know where racism is rooted. And this is making it extremely hard to also point out, okay, what's racist and what's not. And when people don't can really recognize it and connect it, then there's lots of confusion in discussing this issue, because this has a lot to do, or even made it possible, that Europeans colonized and murdered so many people just to get access to resources and slaves. And people know there were Black slaves, but they don't really know where it started, and that racism played a huge part. Here we can address this issue in our education system. Then people would not be really forced to educate them by themselves, and then the school system would do it for them, and maybe even better, because then everybody could also like debate with each other and raise awareness collectively, and not just like by their own. And suddenly you have to do these like very uncomfortable discussions with family members. When you learn with this in school, you also are being encouraged that we are talking about this collectively.
How can we help our fellow citizens in the Black community who are being oppressed. So what are some solutions of change?
I live in San Francisco, which is very liberal area, but it's also a very gentrified area. Any person of color has basically been moved out of the city over the last 20 years when all of the tech companies came here. But because of coronavirus, all of these office spaces and kitchens and all of these places are now up for rent. So kind of like the white people are moving out again. And I know like there's a bunch of Black owned restaurants that are in Oakland that are now moving back into San Francisco. A lot of these restaurants have like asked for help. Like, can anybody help us? Can anyone do anything? Like, we're trying to, they're calling it like the Buy Back the Block project. I work as a pastry chef, so I would talk to a couple restaurants and different things like that on like how to help them open businesses here in San Francisco. It's hard sometimes because you feel like just you can't make that much of a difference. But I think we're seeing now that it's like just one person actually makes such a big difference, that if one person helps this one person, that's what's going to fix the system. If you just educate one person, then that person will go educate somebody else. And eventually, hopefully, we're all educated and smarter and better.
Kind of to piggyback off of what Ashlee was saying, I think that the number one way to help Black citizens and anyone who's being oppressed is always going to come down to money. Pulling people out of poverty and adding to the collective wealth of those people is important. So shopping Black-owned businesses, getting Black store owners, Black restaurant owners, and getting them into positions of power. Like, to piggyback off the very first topic we were talking about, is to have those people at the table. That always is going to come down to money, especially in a country like the US where it's a capitalist society. If we can have companies, you know, like Fortune 500 companies where the CEO and all the upper management are Black or LGBTQ or female, like that is going to trickle down into the smaller jobs, into the neighborhoods, and into the wealth of our society. So I think it always comes down to money.
Yeah, you mentioned a capitalistic society. Injustice is like very hard to solve within a profit-orientated society. It only favors those who already are in power. There would be a lot of steps needed that we could at least support those that are already disadvantaged by this system, because the people that were advantaged in the system already climbed up this ladder and pushed it down, and don't give any other people a chance to climb up there. And also sometimes it's not all about all people climbing up there. It's also about very, very powered, very rich people building down their privilege, if that's a term. But we cannot expect in this society where we face so many injustices, not only racism, also sexism, also classism, ableism, and many, many, many more, expect those who are in power to be willing to get rid of their power when it's some sort of, not in human nature, but we are raised with ideals where we don't actually question these aspects. And then it's very hard, because of course rich people work for their money. Who wants to give it back when they are not shown that this would have huge and great impact on society? Because when everybody has their basic human rights, we would actually have moved a huge step forward as a civilization. But many people do not want to see it. They're always like, yeah, but I want to have the best for me and the best for my life, without even realizing, yeah, but see, we could do so much more together as a society. And this would like positively impact also people that are discriminated by a racist system.
I think education is a huge part, community-based projects as well as additional funding, but having the conversation, educating not just children but adults as well, things like this, and just broadening this on a larger scale, making people understand, learn, feel, and hopefully spreading these messages and having these conversations so people do end up understanding, because by every conversation we had, I might have my strong ideas on something, but I've learned a hell of a lot by today's session. So I think it's highly beneficial having open discussions, certainly.
I do have a success story of a Facebook argument that turned somebody. She was all, I just don't think burning down your neighborhood is like the right thing to do, and protests shouldn't be violent. And I mean, it was not a civil argument. There was discourse and name calling. But she slid into my inbox like 3 or 4 days later and was like, you were right, and I apologize, and I need to do better. And I was like, you're the first person who's ever done that. No one has ever like sat and reflected on it. So I just think like sometimes it feels like it's not worth it to have these conversations. But I mean, if you could even get through to somebody like just once.
Wouldn't it be amazing if that became normalized? You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like people just like, you know what, I got it wrong, and you were right.
I was so proud of her, and I was like, thank you for sending me this message. Thank you for thinking about it. Like and I apologize for getting aggressive, which, you know, that's my default. So, you know, but you know, she realized like that there's a reason why people are responding the way they are, and that after so many hours of peace, years of, you know, peaceful protests and asking for justice and asking to stop being killed, like people aren't going to ask anymore. They're going to demand it. And I think she realized that. And, you know, then she went to a Black Lives Matter protest and she started shopping Black owned businesses. And I'm just like, I love to see it. I love to see this growth.
I think conversing as opposed to yelling feelings at somebody, you know what I mean? And opening up the door to what is your stance? Talk to me. Like, I want to hear your side so that I can now educate you. That's something that I think education for people who are unwilling to see the truth is where they're going to learn the most, as opposed to just being attacked. You know, the saying of hate can't fight hate all the time, and anger can't fight anger. You don't get anywhere with that. There is always going to be a point where the person doesn't want to hear it and they're just not going to. I think starting with the conversation and allowing that. I at first had somebody in my own family attack me over my stance with the movement, and initially I blocked them from seeing any more of my content because I was just over it, and I didn't want to get that from a family member. And then I realized that was the wrong move. I need them to see this, and then I also need to open that conversation up so that I'm not just allowing this person to keep going with that mentality. You know, somebody needs to talk to them head on, and that's extremely uncomfortable, and it's extremely difficult to do that, and it puts yourself in a very vulnerable position. But that's what's necessary is getting those uncomfortable conversations as opposed to just blocking them right away, because again, that doesn't help them. It doesn't help them at all. And I think there are some people who are willing to understand, or willing to at least try to put themselves in those shoes, try to move forward a little bit. But nobody does well with just straight up anger and yelling and an argument. You know, in no situation does a legitimate argument ever actually come up with some sort of a solution if there's no real meat of the conversation involved.
Well, I think that us as a group of people who are white, we need to recognize that the fact that we can speak about this with patience and kindness is a privilege, because totally. it was me. I'm only half white, and then the other girl who was like on the same side as me, she was a Black woman, and our patience was up. We were like, no, we tried to be civil with you, and you are just digging your heels into the ground, and you need to be put in your place. And I think that that's the role of a true white ally, is like, you're going to be the one who's patient, because Black women are not doing it anymore. And
that's our job right now.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm glad that we all can recognize that that's not only the privilege that we have, but it's our duty.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Final thoughts. Obviously we have a lot of work to do. We're not anywhere close. If anything, it's just the beginning. We're not anywhere close to where we need to be by any means. And I guess the best things that we can do is keep the conversation going, and also uplifting Black voices as well, and making sure that they get heard, because it is not about us. Even though everybody is part of the solution, I think a big thing is also letting people's stories and experiences be heard. Also, I've enjoyed this a lot, so thank you very much, Ivy, and thanks everybody for sharing and having the time to talk.
One thing I kind of probably need to work more towards following this is kind of pushing myself a bit more towards having the conversation with the people that don't want to have the conversation. and working on that, and maybe a process or a way to make it kind of a safe space, kind of an easier way to have the conversation with someone who doesn't want to have the conversation.
I really liked this. I thought that it was very informative to hear people from other countries talk, but it is kind of nice knowing that we're all kind of on the same page and experiencing the same things. It makes it feel like more like globally people are going to fix this, which is a nice feeling.
Certain aspects gave me new material to think about, food for my mind. And I also see lots of potential because we did our step there. Others can make their steps towards more thinking about this situation. And really thank you to you all.
Hillary.
It's wonderful to hear. It kind of goes along with what we were just saying of speaking to the same group all the time. So it's so lovely to hear from those who we're unfamiliar with, and knowing that there's a similar feeling, not necessarily across the board with everybody, but just knowing that there are others out there. I find that for me personally, sometimes, actually, I wanted to say thank you to Sofia for that comment of it is as having the patience, or I guess it is a privilege to have patience as a white person, and I've been talking to my friends about that as well. We have the privilege to have patience with this and to talk to our fellow white family members and friends about what's going on and how to fix this, and that's something that we should use, and that's kind of our duty right now. And thank you for not clarifying, but for calling me out on missing that piece. But that is something that sometimes I feel when you're trying to, or when I'm trying to talk to my friends about continuing the conversation, it can feel very lonely and it can feel very isolated because it is just that group of friends. And then I need to push myself to reach out to those who I do not know, who are also in this. And we can kind of collaborate as a group and bring in the voices that need to be heard, while in the background, we can be doing work on our own race, as white people, and having the conversation and opening that up so that they can start seeing faster and then hearing the voices that we try to amplify. So I appreciate so much being invited, to hearing people I don't know, and thank you so much for putting this together. It definitely motivates me to talk to more people I don't know well.
It was quite informal. Sadly, I couldn't follow all the time because, buddy, yeah. I definitely disagree on some points. Must say, but that are just things like that I see something a bit different, but I agree that it's important to do something for people to be justice.
Can I ask you quickly what you disagreed on?
The definition of racism. I completely disagree on that. I don't see the part of the needed system. For me, if a person says something, the origins of the peoples who are present in this statement are interchangeable completely. Like if a white person says something to a black person, it's the same racist for me as a black person saying something like that to a white person.
Does anybody want to say something really quickly?
I mean, you do know the definition of racism involves a system of oppression against a person.
I know, but I don't care because I don't see it that way.
It seems like maybe you might have it mistaken potentially with prejudice.
Maybe not. I don't really know. And even if it's not racist, when a black person or a people of color says it to a white man, I will say that it's definitely not nice to say something like that.
It's not okay either way, but there's a lot more weight if it's coming from the oppressor.
Definitely.
It's not okay to express discrimination or prejudice. So likewise, I mean, it's not okay for anybody to say just to have a discrimination. Really, like that bottom line is not okay. But I think what we're saying is that the definition of racism is on a systematic level of experiencing oppression. So if a black person was going to say something negative or express a biased opinion against a white person, that would be labeled as prejudice or discrimination as opposed to actual racism. I would just encourage you to just look up the different definitions of racism, prejudice, and discrimination.
I think it goes back a lot to what Sam was saying too when we were discussing it about the isms. There's a reason that capitalism, racism, sexism, they all end with that sound ism, because it is a system. That's what that is. Capitalism is a system. Socialism is a system. Communism is a system. So is sexism. So is racism. So is ableism. So that ism is actually a very important part of the word, whereas prejudice is a different word, a different definition.
That sounded good to me. That is something I can somehow understand.
Okay, see? Progress. Sofia, final thoughts?
Thank you, Ivy, for facilitating this. This was great. Definitely enjoyed it. I'm really happy that I got to hear some accents. It's so nice. And just to hear about how things are in other parts of the world. You know, I live in California. It's a very liberal place. Most of the people who live here I'm in line with. So sometimes it starts to feel like a little bubble, and I want to get outside of that bubble. So it just was really nice to be able to do this. We need to go harder for Black women all the time. So that's my final thoughts.
Thank you, Daniel, for like speaking up at the end there. And like, it's interesting to, you know, I know sometimes it's hard to like speak out if you disagree with a group of people, but like that's appreciated. And yeah, thanks everyone for sharing.
I want to formally thank every single one of you guys for taking the time to come on board to having this discussion. I've learned so much from you guys. Bye.
Oh.